When the James Webb Space Telescope completes its deepest cosmic survey, scientists discover something that changes everything. Our Milky Way, once thought to be vast and majestic, is revealed to be nothing more than a tiny speck drifting on the edge of a structure so impossibly large it redefines what small truly means. As astronomers race to make sense of the data, strange gravitational distortions begin to appear, patterns that suggest something unsettling. The massive structure isn't just sitting there in the void. It seems to be responding to our observation. What happens when humanity realizes we've just been noticed by something far beyond our comprehension? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of quiet that only exists between people who have long since exhausted the need for constant conversation. Through the windows, Eleanor watched clouds drift across the spring sky, their shapes constantly shifting, never quite settling into anything permanent. The universe was like that too, she thought. Always moving, always changing, indifferent to human attempts to pin it down with equations and theories. "I got a call this morning," Eleanor said eventually. "From Claire?" Sarah's eyebrows rose. Eleanor's daughter had been a difficult subject for years, ever since Claire had moved to Seattle and slowly reduced her contact with her mother to obligatory holiday calls and occasional terse emails. The distance between them had started long before the physical separation, back when Robert's illness had consumed Eleanor's attention and Claire had been forced to navigate her teenage years largely alone. "That's good, isn't it?" Sarah asked carefully. "I think so," Eleanor replied. She wanted to know about the survey, said she'd been reading articles about it, wanted to understand what we were looking for. "What did you tell her?" Eleanor smiled despite herself. "I tried to explain Robert's theory. The large-scale structures, the possibility that galaxies exist within frameworks we can't yet see." She listened. Really listened, Sarah. Not like she was humoring me, but like she actually cared. "Maybe she's ready to reconnect," Sarah suggested. "People change. They grow into understanding things their younger selves couldn't grasp." "She's 34 now," Eleanor said, the number still somehow surprising her. Where had the time gone? One moment Claire was a child, asking why stars twinkled. The next, she was a grown woman with a career in environmental law and a life Eleanor barely knew. I missed so much of her growing up, too busy looking at distant galaxies to see what was right in front of me. "Eleanor," Sarah's voice carried gentle firmness. "You were a working mother in a demanding field. You did your best in impossible circumstances. And when Robert got sick, you did what you had to do. Claire understands that now, or she's starting to. That's why she called." Eleanor wanted to believe that. She wanted to think that the distance between her and her daughter could be bridged, that some discoveries could be made in time to matter. But years of missed recitals and forgotten birthdays, of choosing telescope time over school events, had built walls that might prove stronger than any late-life regrets. "She asked if she could come visit," Eleanor said, "after the data comes in. Said she wanted to see where I work, meet the people I talk about." "That's wonderful," Sarah said, her enthusiasm genuine. "You should say yes." "I did say yes," Eleanor admitted. "I'm just terrified I'll disappoint her again, that she'll see me here and realize I'm still the same person who chose stars over her." Sarah set down her sandwich and turned to face Eleanor fully. "Listen to me. You are not the same person. Neither is she. You've both lived entire lives since those years. She's reaching out because she wants to know you now, not punish you for the past. Don't rob both of you of that chance because you're afraid." The words settled into Eleanor like stones dropping into still water, creating ripples that spread outward until they touched something deep and tender. Sarah was right, of course. Fear had always been Eleanor's worst enemy, the thing that made her retreat into work rather than face uncomfortable emotions. It had cost her dearly over the years. Maybe it was time to try something different. "You're annoyingly wise sometimes," Eleanor said. "It's a burden I bear with grace," Sarah replied, picking up her sandwich again. Now eat. You'll need your strength for the next 4 days. Jim's going to work us half to death, making sure everything's perfect for the data reception. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Jim appeared in the doorway again, this time with Marcus trailing behind him. Both men wore expressions that made Eleanor's stomach tighten with anticipation. "We've got an update from the Webb team," Jim said. "They've moved up the data transmission window. We're now 72 hours out instead of 96. Marcus was already moving toward his station, fingers flying across keyboards as he pulled up schedules and system checks. "We can be ready," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "We'll need to accelerate the final calibrations, but we can be ready." "Why the change?" Sarah asked, standing and brushing sandwich crumbs from her lap. Jim hesitated, and in that pause, Eleanor saw something she didn't like. Uncertainty, maybe, or concern. "They're seeing some anomalies in the preliminary data," he finally said. "Nothing wrong with the telescope, but the images coming through are showing structures they didn't expect. They want to get us the full data set sooner so we can help them make sense of it." Eleanor felt her heart rate increase, that familiar combination of excitement and apprehension flooding through her system. "What kind of structures?" "They wouldn't say over the phone," Jim replied. "But the lead engineer I spoke with sounded shaken. Said they've never seen anything like it in all their years of cosmic surveying." The control room fell silent, except for the soft hum of electronics and the clicking of Marcus's keyboard. Eleanor looked at Sarah, then at Jim, seeing her own mixture of hope and dread reflected in their faces. They were scientists, trained to approach the unknown with skepticism and rigor. But they were also human beings who had spent their entire careers hoping to see something that would change everything. 3 days, Eleanor said softly, more to herself than the others. 72 hours until we see what's really out there. She thought of Robert, of his notes in her journal, of his last years spent chasing a theory that might finally be proven true or false. She thought of Claire, preparing to visit and reconnect. She thought of the vastness of space and the smallness of human understanding, and how sometimes those two things collided in ways that transformed everything. "Then we'd better get to work," she said, setting aside her half-eaten sandwich and moving toward her station. Whatever was coming, whatever those anomalies meant, they would face it together. That much, at least, hadn't changed in all her years of seeking answers from the stars. The data arrived at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday that would forever divide Eleanor's life into before and after. She had dozed off in her chair, head resting on folded arms, when Marcus's sharp intake of breath jolted her awake. The control room had the hollow quality of deep night, lit only by the glow of monitors and the emergency exit signs casting red shadows along the walls. "Eleanor," Marcus said, his voice carefully controlled in the way people speak when they're trying not to panic. "You need to see this." She pushed herself upright, joints protesting the awkward sleeping position, and moved to stand behind his chair. The main display showed what should have been a familiar sight. The deep field image from Webb, billions of light years of cosmic history compressed into a single frame. Galaxies scattered across the darkness like luminous seeds, their light ancient by the time it reached human eyes. Except something was wrong with the distribution. "Pull up the preliminary models," Eleanor said, her scientific training taking over even as her pulse quickened. "Let me see the comparison." Marcus's fingers danced across the keyboard, splitting the screen to show their predicted galactic distributions alongside the actual data. For a moment, Eleanor couldn't process what she was seeing. The galaxies weren't scattered randomly as expected. They formed a pattern, a structure so vast that individual galaxies looked like pixels in a much larger image. "That can't be right," she whispered. "Check the calibration." "There must be an error in the data processing." "Already did," Marcus replied. 3 times. "Eleanor, the calibration is perfect." "This is what's actually out there." Sarah arrived 20 minutes later, summoned by Marcus's urgent text. She stood beside Eleanor, staring at the display in silence for so long that Eleanor wondered if she'd forgotten to breathe. When Sarah finally spoke, Her voice carried an edge Eleanor had never heard before. Fear, maybe, or wonder so profound it had crossed into terror. "Dear God," Sarah said. Robert was right. He was right about all of it. Jim burst through the door, still wearing his jacket, clearly having rushed from home. "What's the emergency?" Marcus said it couldn't wait until morning. Eleanor pointed at the screen, unable to find words adequate to explain. Jim approached slowly, his experienced eye taking in the data with the kind of focused attention that had made him an exceptional mission director. She watched understanding dawn across his face, watched him grasp the implications of what they were seeing. "How big?" Jim asked quietly. "We're still running calculations," Marcus said, pulling up a separate window filled with cascading numbers. "But preliminary estimates suggest the structure is at least 1 billion light-years across, maybe more. The Milky Way, our entire local group, everything we can see with conventional telescopes, fits into what looks like a small peripheral section near the edge." Eleanor felt the floor tilt beneath her feet, had to grip the back of Marcus's chair to steady herself. 1 billion light-years. The number was so large it stopped meaning anything. The observable universe itself was only 93 billion light-years in diameter. They were looking at something that represented a significant fraction of existence itself, and their galaxy sat on its rim like a barnacle on a ship's hull. "What is it?" Jim asked. "A superstructure? Some kind of cosmic web formation we haven't seen before." "It's too organized for natural formation," Sarah said, already moving to her own station to run calculations. "The distribution has mathematical properties, ratios, patterns. This isn't random cosmic evolution. This is architecture." The word hung in the air like smoke. Architecture implied architects. It implied intention, design, purpose. Eleanor's mind recoiled from the implications, even as her scientific curiosity surged forward, hungry to understand. "We need to verify this," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Contact the other observatories. See if anyone else has detected this structure. We could be seeing artifacts from the imaging process, some quirk of how Webb processes data at these distances." "Already started," Marcus said. "Sent queries to facilities in Chile, Hawaii, Australia. If they've got deep field data from the same region, we'll know within a few hours." Eleanor returned to her own station, pulling up Robert's old files with shaking hands. He had predicted large-scale structures, had insisted that galactic distributions suggested organization rather than randomness. But even his most ambitious theories hadn't prepared her for this. The structure they were seeing dwarfed his predictions by orders of magnitude. She opened her observation journal, Robert's handwriting staring up at her from a note written years before his death. "What if the universe isn't just bigger than we think, but bigger in dimensions we haven't learned to measure?" "You couldn't have known," she whispered to the memory of him. "None of us could have known it was this big." The first confirmation came from the Atacama Observatory in Chile 3 hours later. Their deep field data matched Webb's findings exactly. The structure was real, repeatable, undeniable. Within 6 hours, observatories around the world were reporting the same thing. Humanity had been living on the cosmic equivalent of a rural outpost, never realizing that everything they could see fit into the margins of something incomprehensibly larger. Eleanor found herself in Jim's office as dawn broke outside. The 4 of them gathered around his desk like survivors of a shipwreck, trying to make sense of their situation. Coffee had been consumed in quantities that would have alarmed a cardiologist. No one had slept. No one seemed capable of sleep with the weight of this discovery pressing down on them. "We need to decide how to release this," Jim said, rubbing his temples. "The press is already asking questions. Other facilities are going to publish their findings within hours if we don't move first. How do you tell humanity it's smaller than it thought?" Marcus asked, his usual composure frayed by exhaustion and shock. "How do you explain that everything we've ever known, every galaxy we've ever catalogued, every distance we've ever measured is just a tiny fraction of what's actually out there?" "Carefully," Sarah said. "Very carefully. There are philosophical implications here that go beyond astronomy. Religious communities will want answers. Governments will want assurances. People will be frightened. Eleanor thought about Claire, about their planned visit, about trying to explain this to her daughter who had finally reached out after so many years of silence. How did you tell your child that the universe had just gotten so much bigger that humanity's place in it had to be completely reconsidered? There's something else, Marcus said, pulling up his tablet to show them additional data. I've been analyzing the structure's geometry while we waited for confirmations. The mathematical ratios I'm seeing, they're not random. They follow patterns similar to what we see in engineered systems, optimal distribution networks, efficient information flow architectures. You're saying it's artificial? Jim asked, his voice carefully neutral. I'm saying it shows properties inconsistent with natural cosmic evolution, Marcus replied. Whether that means artificial or just operating under physical laws we don't yet understand, I can't say. But something organized this structure with purpose. The implications crashed over Eleanor like a wave. An artificial structure 1 billion light-years across. The technological capability required for such construction exceeded human comprehension by factors that made infinity look modest. And if it was artificial, that meant something had built it. Something that made humanity look like microbes by comparison. We publish what we know, Eleanor said finally. We show the data, explain the structure's scale, and acknowledge that we don't understand it yet. We don't speculate about artificial origins until we have more evidence. We certainly don't use words like engineered or constructed in our initial announcement. The media will speculate anyway, Jim pointed out. Let them, Eleanor replied. Our job is to present facts and honest uncertainty. We're scientists, not prophets. We say we've discovered a large-scale cosmic structure that challenges our understanding of universal organization. We say more research is needed. We keep it simple and true, Sarah nodded slowly. Eleanor's right. We control what we can control, which is our own integrity and rigor. Everything else will unfold, however it unfolds. Jim stood, moving to the window, where the rising sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. A new day, Eleanor thought. The last day of the old universe, before humanity learned how small it really was. Tomorrow, everything would be different. Tomorrow, 7 billion people would wake up to news that would force them to reconsider their place in existence. All right, Jim said, turning back to face them. We brief the administration at 9. Press conference at noon. Eleanor, you're the primary spokesperson. Sarah and Marcus, you'll handle technical questions. I'll manage the logistics and political fallout. We've got 4 hours to prepare the announcement that changes everything. Eleanor thought about her observation journal, about Robert's notes, about all the years spent asking questions about the cosmos. She had wanted answers. Now she had them, and they were so much more terrifying and magnificent than anything she had imagined. The universe wasn't just bigger than they thought. It was bigger in ways that made their previous understanding look like a child's drawing of infinity. The press conference unfolded with the surreal quality of a dream Eleanor couldn't quite wake from. Cameras flashed like small supernovas as she stood at the podium, the deep field image projected on the screen behind her. She had given hundreds of presentations in her career, but none with stakes like these. The assembled journalists represented every major news organization on the planet, all hungry for details about the discovery that had already leaked through scientific channels. Eleanor explained the structure's scale using comparisons that still felt inadequate. If the Milky Way was a grain of sand, she said, then this cosmic structure would be larger than Earth. Even that failed to capture the true magnitude. Some things were simply too vast for human metaphors. Questions came in a torrent. Was it natural or artificial? Did it suggest intelligent design? What did it mean for humanity's understanding of creation? Eleanor answered what she could with honesty, acknowledged what remained unknown with humility. She watched the reporters' faces cycle through disbelief, excitement, fear, and wonder. Sometimes all at once. By the time the conference ended 2 hours later, Eleanor felt wrung out like an old dishcloth. Jim guided her away from the microphones, through a side door that led to a quiet hallway, where they could catch their breath away from the cameras and questions. "You did well," Jim said. "Better than I could have. I feel like I just told 7 billion people that everything they thought they knew was wrong," Eleanor replied, leaning against the wall. "Because I did. We all did." Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to find a text from Claire. "Mom, I'm watching the press conference. Are you okay? Call me when you can." Eleanor stared at the message, feeling tears prick unexpectedly at her eyes. Her daughter was worried about her. After everything, after all the years of distance and silence, Claire's first response to learning that the universe was incomprehensibly larger than anyone thought was to check on her mother's well-being. "I need to make a call," Eleanor said to Jim. "Give me 15 minutes. He nodded understanding and headed back toward the control room, leaving her alone in the hallway. Eleanor dialed Claire's number with shaking fingers, not sure what she would say, but knowing she needed to hear her daughter's voice. "Mom," Claire answered on the first ring. "I've been watching the coverage. This is real, everything they're saying about the structure?" "It's real," Eleanor confirmed. "More real than anything I've ever discovered. Claire, I don't even know how to begin processing what this means." "It means your theory was right," Claire said softly. "Dad's theory. You two were right all along about large-scale cosmic organization." Eleanor felt something break loose in her chest, some tension she'd been carrying for 6 years without realizing it. "I wish he could see this," she whispered. "He should be here for this discovery." "He is here," Claire replied with quiet certainty. "Maybe not the way we'd like, but his work made this possible. You made it possible by continuing what he started. Mom, I'm so proud of you. I know I haven't said that enough over the years, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud of who you are and what you've accomplished." Eleanor covered her mouth with her free hand, fighting to keep her composure. "Thank you," she managed. "That means more than you know." "I'm coming to visit next week, like we planned," Claire continued. "Actually, I'm thinking of coming sooner if that's okay. I want to be there with you while you're processing all of this. You shouldn't have to go through something this huge alone." "I'd like that," Eleanor said, meaning it with her entire heart. "I'd really like that." They talked for a few more minutes, Claire asking questions about the discovery, while Eleanor tried to explain in layman's terms what the data showed. It felt good to share this with someone who cared about her, rather than just the scientific implications. When they finally said goodbye, Eleanor felt steadier than she had since the data first arrived. She returned to the control room to find it transformed into organized chaos. Additional personnel had been brought in to help process the flood of incoming data and requests for collaboration. The discovery had triggered a global scientific mobilization, with research institutions around the world offering resources and expertise. Everyone wanted to be part of understanding this cosmic revelation. Marcus waved her over to his station, where he had several new displays showing gravitational data from deep space monitoring stations. "We've got another problem," he said, his tone suggesting the problem was significant. Or maybe not a problem. "I don't know what to call it yet." "Show me," Eleanor said, settling into the chair beside him. He pulled up a series of gravitational wave readings from the past 72 hours, highlighting specific patterns in the data. "These are gravitational distortions detected around the structure," he explained. "Normally, we'd expect stable patterns from something this massive. But look at these fluctuations." Eleanor studied the readings, her trained eye picking out the irregularities Marcus had flagged. The gravitational waves showed variations that didn't match any known natural phenomena. They pulsed with something almost resembling rhythm, patterns that repeated at intervals too precise to be random. "When did these start?" she asked. "That's the interesting part," Marcus replied, zooming in on the timeline. "They started approximately 6 hours after we received the initial Webb data, right around the time we began our analysis." A chill ran down Eleanor's spine. "You're saying these distortions began after we started observing the structure?" "I'm saying the timing is suspicious," Marcus said carefully. "Could be coincidence. The universe is full of coincidences. But the pattern recognition algorithms are showing correlations I can't explain through random chance alone. Sarah appeared behind them, having overheard the last part of the conversation. "Let me see those readings," she said, her voice carrying the intensity it always took on when she was working through a problem. Marcus transferred the data to her station, and she dove into analysis, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she ran calculations. Eleanor stood and walked to the windows, needing a moment to think without the distraction of screens and data. Outside, the world continued its mundane routines. Cars moved through the parking lot. Trees swayed in the spring breeze. People lived their lives, unaware or only dimly aware that the universe had just revealed itself to be far stranger than anyone had imagined. Her phone buzzed again. This time, the message was from an old colleague at MIT, asking if she would be willing to participate in an emergency symposium on the discovery. 3 more messages followed in quick succession. Universities wanting to collaborate, news organizations requesting interviews, even a message from someone claiming to represent the Vatican's astronomical observatory, asking for her insights on the theological implications. The world was reacting exactly as she had feared it would, with a mixture of fascination and panic, everyone trying to fit this cosmic revelation into their existing frameworks of understanding. But Eleanor was beginning to suspect that those frameworks were inadequate, that this discovery required entirely new ways of thinking about existence itself. "Eleanor," Sarah called out, her voice tight with something Eleanor couldn't quite identify. "You need to see what I'm finding here." She returned to Sarah's station, where a complex 3D model rotated on the screen. The gravitational distortions had been plotted in space-time, revealing patterns that looked disturbingly like wave interference, the kind of patterns that appeared when signals interacted with each other. "These aren't random gravitational fluctuations," Sarah said. "They're following mathematical sequences, Fibonacci spirals, prime number distributions, golden ratios. Someone or something is modulating the gravitational field of that structure with intentional patterns." "Could it be a natural resonance?" Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer. "Some property of structures at that scale we haven't encountered before." "Nature doesn't produce Fibonacci sequences with this level of precision," Sarah replied. "Not at cosmic scales. Eleanor, I think we're looking at a signal. The structure is responding to our observation of it." Jim had appeared at some point during the conversation, drawn by the gravity of their discovery, building upon discovery. "Are you telling me that thing out there knows we're looking at it?" he asked. "I'm telling you the gravitational distortions began when we began observing, and they follow mathematical patterns that suggest intentionality," Sarah said. "What that means exactly, I can't say, but coincidence is looking less and less likely." Eleanor felt the floor tilt again, that same sensation of unreality she had experienced when first seeing the structure's true scale. They weren't just looking at something vast and ancient. They were looking at something that was, in some ways she didn't yet understand, looking back. "We need to document everything," she said, her scientific training providing an anchor in the face of implications she wasn't ready to process. "Every fluctuation, every pattern, every correlation. If this is first contact, if we're witnessing some form of communication from something on a cosmic scale, then we need to preserve every detail." "First contact," Jim repeated softly. "Jesus, Eleanor, do you realize what you're saying?" "I realize we're seeing something unprecedented," Eleanor replied. "Whether it's contact or just cosmic phenomena we don't understand yet, we have a responsibility to document it rigorously. That's our job. Understanding comes later." Marcus had been quiet during the exchange, but now he spoke up. "There's one more thing," he said. "I've been running predictive models based on the pattern progression. If the distortions continue evolving at their current rate, within 2 weeks they'll be strong enough to detect with ground-based observatories. Within a month they'll be visible to amateur astronomers with good equipment. Meaning we can't keep this quiet, even if we wanted to," Jim said. "Meaning the world is about to get a lot stranger," Sarah added. And fast. The following days blurred together in a haze of data analysis, conference calls, and too little sleep. Eldanor found herself at the center of a global scientific effort, coordinating with researchers across disciplines and continents as they tried to make sense of the structure and its apparent responses. Physicists proposed theories about exotic matter and dark energy interactions. Mathematicians analyzed the patterns in the gravitational distortions. Even linguists got involved, suggesting that if the patterns represented communication, they might follow principles similar to human language. Eleanor's observation journal filled with notes faster than at any point in her career. She recorded everything, the scientific observations mixing with personal reflections, as she tried to process not just the discovery, but what it meant for her understanding of existence. Robert's old notes stared up at her from earlier pages, his speculation about cosmic awareness suddenly seeming less like fantasy and more like prophecy. "Do you think he knew?" she asked Sarah one evening, the two of them alone in the control room, long after everyone else had gone home. "Robert, I mean. Do you think he somehow understood what we'd find?" Sarah considered the question while reviewing spectroscopic data from the structure's edge. "I think he saw patterns where others saw noise," she finally said. "Whether that was genius or intuition or something else, I couldn't say. But he pointed you in the right direction. That counts for something. I keep thinking about his last months," Eleanor admitted. "He was obsessed with the idea that the universe was aware of itself, that consciousness existed at scales we couldn't perceive. I thought it was the cancer, the medications affecting his thinking. But what if he was just seeing more clearly than the rest of us? Then he was a man ahead of his time," Sarah replied gently. "But Eleanor, you can't spend your energy wondering what Robert knew or didn't know. He gave you the foundation. You built the rest. This discovery is as much yours as it ever was his." Eleanor wanted to believe that, but guilt and grief had their own logic that didn't respond well to reason. She had spent 6 years continuing Robert's work, partly out of love, partly out of obligation, and partly because stopping would have meant acknowledging his loss in ways she wasn't ready to face. Now that his theories were being vindicated, she felt his absence more acutely than ever. Her phone rang, breaking the contemplative mood. Claire's name appeared on the screen. Eleanor had been talking to her daughter almost daily since the discovery, their conversations ranging from the scientific details to more personal matters they had avoided for years. Claire had postponed her visit by a week to let the initial chaos settle, but she was scheduled to arrive tomorrow. "Hi, sweetie," Eleanor answered. "Everything okay?" "I'm watching the news," Claire said, her voice carrying an edge of concern. "They're saying the gravitational distortions are getting stronger, that people are starting to panic about what it might mean." Eleanor glanced at the displays showing real-time monitoring data. The distortions had indeed increased in amplitude over the past week, the patterns becoming more complex and pronounced. "We're monitoring the situation closely," she said, falling into the careful language she'd learned to use when discussing something that had no precedent. "There's no indication of any danger to Earth or our solar system." "That's not what I asked," Claire said. "I asked if people should be panicking." Eleanor appreciated her daughter's directness, so much like Robert's habit of cutting through scientific jargon to reach the heart of matters. "Honestly, I don't know," she admitted. "We're seeing something unprecedented. The structure appears to be responding to observation with intentional patterns. What that means, whether it represents communication or threat or simple cosmic processes we don't understand, we can't say yet." "Should I still come visit?" Claire asked quietly. "Yes," Eleanor said without hesitation. "Whatever happens, I want you here. I need you here." She heard Claire's breath catch, a small sound that spoke volumes about the emotion both of them were trying to navigate. "Okay," Claire said. "I'll be on the morning flight. Mom, I love you." "I love you too," Eleanor replied, the words feeling both natural and strange after so many years of emotional distance. "See you tomorrow." After the call ended, Eleanor sat in the quiet control room, surrounded by the evidence of humanity's cosmic smallness, and felt something shift inside her. The universe had revealed itself to be incomprehensibly vast, but in that vastness she had found her daughter again. Perhaps that was the real discovery, that in the face of cosmic insignificance, human connections became more rather than less important. "Go home," Sarah said, packing up her own materials. "Get some sleep. Your daughter arrives tomorrow, and you'll want to be coherent for that reunion." "In a minute," Eleanor replied. "I just want to check one more thing." She pulled up the holographic display of the gravitational distortion map, watching the patterns pulse and shift like a living thing. The mathematical sequences Sarah had identified were growing more elaborate, building on themselves in ways that suggested increasing complexity. If it was communication, then whatever was sending it was becoming more fluent, more intentional in its attempts to be understood. Eleanor reached out and touched the hologram, her fingers passing through the light-formed representation of forces that operated across billions of light years. Somewhere out there in the cosmic dark, something vast beyond comprehension had noticed humanity's notice. It was responding, reaching back across the void with patterns and mathematics, trying perhaps to establish some form of contact or understanding. "What are you?" she whispered to the display. "What do you want us to know?" The patterns pulsed and shifted, following rhythms that physics could measure but not yet explain. Eleanor watched them for a long moment, feeling the weight of questions that might take lifetimes to answer, if they could be answered at all. Then she shut down her station, gathered her journal, and headed home to prepare for her daughter's arrival. Some mysteries had to wait. Some relationships couldn't. She had learned that lesson the hard way, but perhaps it wasn't too late to apply it. The universe could keep its secrets a little longer. Tomorrow, she would focus on the human scale of existence, on the daughter she had lost and found again in the shadow of cosmic revelation. Claire stood in the arrivals terminal wearing a green jacket Eleanor remembered buying her for Christmas 10 years ago, back when they still exchanged gifts without the awkwardness that had crept into their relationship. Her daughter had Robert's eyes, dark and observant, missing nothing. Those eyes found Eleanor in the crowd, and something in Claire's expression softened, became vulnerable in a way that made Eleanor's chest ache. They met in an embrace that started tentative and became fierce, both of them holding on longer than strictly necessary. Eleanor breathed in the familiar scent of her daughter's shampoo, some expensive organic brand Claire had always preferred, and felt tears threatening despite her best efforts at composure. "You look tired," Claire said when they finally pulled apart, her voice carrying the gentle concern of someone who had learned caretaking the hard way. "Are you sleeping at all?" "Some," Eleanor lied. "It's been busy." "It's been world-changing," Claire corrected, picking up her bag. "Mom, you discovered something that's forcing humanity to completely reconsider its place in the universe. You're allowed to admit that's overwhelming." They walked to the parking garage in comfortable silence, the kind that only existed between people who had known each other long enough to not need constant conversation. Eleanor found herself studying her daughter from the corner of her eye, taking in the changes that years and distance had wrought. Claire moved with confidence now, the uncertain teenager replaced by a woman who knew her own mind. Eleanor felt proud and regretful in equal measure, glad to see who Claire had become, while mourning all the steps of that becoming she had missed. The drive to the facility took 40 minutes through Maryland countryside, touched by late spring warmth. Claire asked questions about the discovery, and Eleanor answered them, slipping into the familiar role of teacher that felt safer than navigating the emotional complexities of their reunion. But when they passed the exit that would have taken them to Eleanor's house, Claire spoke up. "Aren't we going to your place first? I thought I'd drop my bags off. I need to check something at the lab," Eleanor said. "It'll just take a few minutes. Then we can go home and I'll make dinner." Claire's expression suggested she saw through this excuse, but chose not to challenge it. Eleanor was grateful. The truth was, she felt steadier at the facility than at home, where Robert's absence filled every room and reminders of her failures as a mother lurked in old photos and untouched childhood belongings Claire had left behind. The control room buzzed with activity when they arrived. Marcus looked up from his station and smiled when he saw Claire. "The famous daughter," he said, standing to shake her hand. "I've heard so much about you." "Lies and propaganda," Claire replied with easy humor. "I'm much less impressive than Mom makes me sound." "Impossible," Marcus said gallantly. "Anyone raised by Eleanor must have inherited some portion of her brilliance." Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest at the casual inclusion, the way Marcus treated Claire like family rather than a stranger. Sarah emerged from Jim's office and immediately swept Claire into a hug, having met her years ago during one of the rare occasions when Eleanor's personal and professional lives had intersected. "Look at you," Sarah said, holding Claire at arm's length. "All grown up and beautiful." "How long are you staying?" "A week, maybe longer, if I can work remotely," Claire replied. "I wanted to understand what Mom's been discovering, and maybe understand her a little better too." The words hung in the air, honest and vulnerable. Eleanor felt something in her throat tighten, gratitude and regret mixing into an emotion she didn't have a name for. Sarah caught her eye and smiled with understanding before guiding Claire on a tour of the facility. Eleanor settled into her station, intending to check the latest data as she had claimed. But instead, she found herself watching Claire interact with her colleagues, seeing her daughter charm Marcus with questions about data analysis and draw out Sarah's more philosophical theories about cosmic consciousness. Claire had Robert's gift for making people feel heard, for asking the kind of questions that revealed genuine interest rather than polite small talk. "She's wonderful," Jim said quietly, appearing beside Eleanor's station. "You did good work there." "Robert did most of it," Eleanor admitted. "I was too busy looking at stars to pay proper attention to the remarkable human being growing up in my own house." "Maybe," Jim said. "But she's here now. That's what matters. Second chances are rare, Eleanor. Don't waste this one questioning whether you deserve it." That evening, Eleanor kept her promise and cooked dinner at home for the first time in weeks. Claire helped in the kitchen, the two of them moving around each other with the careful choreography of people relearning shared space. They made Robert's favorite pasta dish, following the recipe he had perfected over years of weekend cooking. Neither of them mentioned why they had chosen this particular meal, but the weight of his absence pressed gently on the room, like a benevolent ghost. Over wine and pasta, Claire asked about the gravitational distortions. Eleanor found herself opening up in ways she hadn't with other colleagues, sharing not just the data, but her fears and hopes about what it might mean. "Sarah thinks the structure might be conscious," Eleanor said, twirling pasta on her fork. "Not conscious like us, but aware at a scale we can barely conceive, like galaxies or neurons in some vast cosmic mind." "What do you think?" Claire asked. Eleanor considered the question, appreciating that her daughter wanted her opinion rather than just accepted scientific consensus. "I think we're seeing something that doesn't fit any framework we have for understanding existence. Whether that's consciousness or just physics beyond our current comprehension, I don't know. But the patterns suggest intentionality, purpose. Something out there is trying to communicate, or at least responding to our attempts to observe it." "That must be terrifying," Claire said softly. "Knowing something that vast is aware of you." "It is," Eleanor admitted, "but also strangely comforting. We've always wondered if we're alone in the universe. Now we have evidence that we're not, even if what we've found is so different from us that alive might not even be the right word for it." Claire was quiet for a moment, studying her wineglass. "Dad would have loved this," she finally said. "Not just being right about his theories, but the mystery of it. The questions it raises." "He would have been insufferable about being vindicated," Eleanor said with a sad smile, "though he'd have earned the right to gloat a little." "Do you miss him?" Claire asked, then immediately shook her head. "Sorry, that's a stupid question. Of course you miss him. Every day, Eleanor said, but especially now. I keep wanting to share this with him, to see his reaction. He spent his last years chasing these ideas and died before he could see them proven true. That feels unbearably unfair. Tell me about his last months, Claire said. The real story, not the sanitized version you gave me when I was too angry and hurt to really listen. Eleanor felt old wounds crack open, but she pushed through the pain because Claire deserved the truth. She talked about Robert's determination to keep working even as the cancer ravaged him, about the notes he made between treatments, about his conviction that he was close to understanding something profound. She talked about the guilt of spending so much time at his bedside that Claire had effectively lost both parents, one to death and one to grief. I should have been there for you more, Eleanor said. You needed me, and I was so consumed by losing him that I couldn't see past my own pain. You were grieving, Claire replied. I understand that now in ways I couldn't at 28. I was angry then because I needed someone to be angry at, and you were there. Dad wasn't, so you got the full force of feelings I didn't know how to process. I still should have done better. Probably, Claire agreed with Robert's characteristic honesty. But we're here now. We're talking. That's more than we've managed in years. Eleanor reached across the table and took her daughter's hand, feeling the warmth of living connection. I'm glad you came, she said. Whatever happens with the discovery, whatever the structure means, I'm glad you're here. Me too, Claire said. Though I have to admit, I partly came because I was scared for you. The news coverage has been intense. People are saying crazy things about end times and cosmic judgment. I wanted to make sure you were okay. I'm okay, Eleanor assured her. Overwhelmed, yes. Occasionally terrified by the implications of what we're seeing. Absolutely. But okay. And better now that you're here. They finished dinner and moved to the living room, where Robert's telescope still stood by the window, pointed at a sky he would never observe again. Claire walked to it, running her hand along the barrel with gentle reverence. Can we look? She asked. Like we used to when I was little? Eleanor felt tears threaten again, but managed to keep them at bay. Of course, she said, moving to adjust the telescope's position. What do you want to see? Show me where you found it, Claire said. The structure. I want to see the part of the sky that changed everything. Eleanor made the adjustments, calculating coordinates from memory. When she had the telescope positioned, she stepped back and let Claire look through the eyepiece at a section of sky that appeared unremarkable to the naked eye, but contained multitudes. The following weeks settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal, despite the extraordinary circumstances. Claire extended her stay, setting up a temporary workspace in Eleanor's study, where she handled her legal cases remotely. They fell into the habit of having coffee together each morning before Eleanor left for the facility, using the time to talk about everything from the latest data on the gravitational distortions to Claire's work on environmental protection cases. The world beyond their small bubble of normalcy continued its chaotic reaction to the discovery. Religious leaders offered competing interpretations, some seeing the structure as evidence of divine creation, others as proof that traditional cosmology needed revision. Governments established task forces to study potential implications for national security, as if something operating on cosmic scales could be addressed through military preparedness. Social media fractured into camps of believers and skeptics, with everyone trying to make sense of humanity's suddenly diminished place in existence. Eleanor tried to stay focused on the science, but it became increasingly difficult as the gravitational distortions grew stronger and more complex. The patterns Sarah had identified evolved almost daily, adding new mathematical sequences and geometric forms that suggested escalating attempts at communication. Other research teams were making progress on potential translation frameworks, treating the distortions as a language waiting to be decoded. It was during one of these intense analysis sessions, 3 months after the initial discovery, that Eleanor made the connection that would change everything. She had been reviewing Robert's old files, cross-referencing his theoretical work with the current observations, when she found a folder she didn't remember seeing before. It was labeled simply "Consciousness at Cosmic Scales" and contained an unfinished manuscript Robert had been working on in the months before his death. Eleanor opened the file with shaking hands, Sarah and Marcus gathering around her station as she began to read. Robert's words flowed with the clarity of someone who had glimpsed profound truth, even if he couldn't prove it yet. He argued that consciousness wasn't limited to biological organisms, but emerged at any scale where complexity allowed for information processing. Galaxies, he suggested, might be the neurons of cosmic-scale awareness, their gravitational interactions forming thoughts that unfolded over billions of years. "My God," Sarah breathed as she read over Eleanor's shoulder. "He predicted exactly what we're seeing. The structure isn't just responding to observation. It's thinking, processing information, becoming aware of us the way we're becoming aware of it." Marcus pulled up the current distortion data, overlaying it with the theoretical models from Robert's manuscript. The correlation was impossible to deny. Every pattern they had observed, every mathematical sequence in the gravitational waves, matched predictions Robert had made years before based on his theories about cosmic consciousness. "He knew," Eleanor said, her voice hollow with realization. "Somehow he knew what we would find. Or he reasoned it out from first principles," Sarah suggested. "Robert was always good at extrapolating from limited data. If he believed consciousness scaled with complexity, then the existence of a billion-light-year structure would naturally lead to questions about what that structure might be thinking." Eleanor scrolled through the manuscript, finding notes Robert had added in the margins during his final months. Many were technical, exploring mathematical approaches to modeling cosmic-scale information processing. But some were more personal, reflections on what it meant to be a tiny consciousness contemplating vastness that made humanity look like quantum foam. One note in particular struck her with the force of revelation. "If the universe is aware," Robert had written, "then observation isn't passive. We don't just see the cosmos, it sees us back. First contact might not come from another planet or galaxy, but from reality itself, becoming conscious of our consciousness within it." "He was tracking something," Eleanor said, her mind racing through implications. "Look at these dates." He was collecting data from multiple sources in his last year, all focused on unusual gravitational signatures from the same region of space where we found the structure. She pulled up Robert's research logs, finding entries that detailed careful observation of anomalies that mainstream astronomy had dismissed as instrumental errors or data artifacts. But Robert had believed they were real, evidence of something vast and organized, operating just beyond the threshold of human perception. "He was trying to map it," Marcus said, now fully engaged in the digital archaeology of Robert's final work. "Look, he created a preliminary model of the structure's geometry based on extrapolation from limited data points. It's crude compared to what we have now, but the basic shape is correct. He knew it was out there years before Webb had the capability to see it." Eleanor felt reality tilt around her, past and present colliding in ways that made her question everything she thought she knew about Robert's death. "Pull up his medical records," she said suddenly. "I want to see the timeline of his symptoms versus his research activity." Jim, who had been listening quietly from his office doorway, stepped forward with concern clear on his face. "Eleanor, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking Robert's cancer might not have been natural," she said, the words feeling dangerous even as she spoke them. "I'm thinking that if he was close to proving cosmic consciousness, if he was gathering evidence that the universe itself was aware, someone might have wanted to stop that research." "That's quite a leap," Jim cautioned. "Cancer happens. Brilliant people die tragically young. That doesn't automatically mean conspiracy." "I know how it sounds," Eleanor replied. "But look at the data. His symptoms accelerated right when his research was showing the most promise. And after he died, his files were archived in ways that made them hard to access. Some of his notes are still classified for reasons no one can explain. Sarah pulled up additional research from the facility's historical database, finding communications between Robert and other scientists who had been working on similar theories about cosmic-scale phenomena. 3 of those scientists had died within 2 years of Robert, all from sudden illnesses or accidents that seemed statistically improbable when clustered together. "This could still be coincidence," Sarah said, but her voice carried doubt. "Science is full of people who died before their work was recognized. That doesn't mean they were murdered." Eleanor knew Sarah was right to be skeptical. She was trained to avoid conspiracy thinking, to look for natural explanations before jumping to extraordinary conclusions. But something in her gut insisted that Robert's death had been too convenient, too well-timed to be mere chance. And if she was right, if someone had wanted to suppress his research, then they might want to suppress her continuation of it as well. The breakthrough came at 2 in the morning, on a Tuesday that Eleanor would remember for the rest of her life. Marcus had been running pattern analysis algorithms on the gravitational distortions for 16 hours straight, fueled by coffee and the kind of obsessive focus that made him brilliant at his work. Eleanor was dozing at her station when his shout of triumph jerked her awake. "I've got it," Marcus said, his voice shaking with excitement or exhaustion or both. "Eleanor, Sarah, Jim, you need to see this right now." They gathered around his display, where he had isolated a specific sequence within the gravitational patterns. At first, Eleanor couldn't see what had Marcus so excited. It looked like the same mathematical progressions they had been observing for weeks. But then Marcus highlighted certain elements, showing how they repeated in precise intervals across different scales of the distortion. "It's a language," he explained, fingers dancing across the keyboard to pull up comparison models. "Not like human language, but mathematical communication. These patterns aren't just responses to our observation. They're structured information transfer, messages." Sarah leaned closer, her trained eye picking apart the structure Marcus had revealed. "Can you decode it?" she asked. "I already started," Marcus replied, pulling up a translation matrix he had been building. "It's not complete, but I can extract basic meaning from some of the simplest sequences. And there's something else. Look at this." He displayed a specific pattern that appeared repeatedly throughout the distortions, a mathematical signature that Marcus had highlighted in red. "This sequence appears at the beginning of every major pattern shift," he explained. "It's like a header, an identifier that marks the start of new information. And when I ran it through geographic correlation algorithms, it pointed to specific coordinates." "Coordinates where?" Jim asked. Marcus pulled up a star chart, showing a region of the Milky Way that Eleanor recognized immediately. Her breath caught in her throat as understanding crashed over her. "That's where Robert was focusing his research," she said. "Those are the exact coordinates he was studying in his final months." "Not just studying," Marcus corrected, pulling up more of Robert's archived files. "He was tracking signals from that location. Unusual electromagnetic emissions that mainstream astronomy dismissed as noise. But look at the frequency patterns." He displayed Robert's data alongside the current gravitational distortions, and the similarities were impossible to miss. Robert had been detecting the same mathematical sequences years ago, just in a different form. The structure hadn't started communicating when humanity discovered it. It had been trying to reach out for years, and Robert had been the only one listening. "He was receiving messages," Sarah said slowly, working through the implications. "The structure was already aware of us, already attempting contact. Robert heard it and tried to understand it." Eleanor felt cold, despite the warmth of the control room. "Then why did he die?" she asked. "If the structure was trying to communicate, why would it harm the one person who was paying attention?" "Maybe it didn't," Marcus said quietly. He pulled up Robert's medical records alongside his research timeline, displaying them side by side. Look at when his symptoms started versus when his research accelerated. The cancer appeared right after he began publishing preliminary findings about cosmic consciousness. Right after he went public with theories that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality. You think someone killed him to suppress his research, Jim said. No longer questioning, but stating fact. I think Robert discovered something that threatened powerful interests, Marcus replied. Whether that was governments worried about societal disruption or religious institutions afraid of cosmological implications or something else entirely, I don't know. But his death and the deaths of other scientists working on similar theories, that's not coincidence. Eleanor's hands shook as she absorbed this revelation. Robert hadn't just been right about cosmic consciousness. He had been murdered for being right, for daring to suggest that humanity existed within something vast and aware that had been trying to reach out. And she had spent 6 years thinking his death was tragic but natural, never questioning, never investigating. We need to access those coordinates, she said, pushing through shock to reach decision. If the structure is pointing us toward that location, if Robert spent his last month studying it, then that's where we'll find answers, Eleanor, Jim said carefully. If Robert was killed for this research, then continuing it puts all of you at risk. We need to consider involving authorities, maybe moving this investigation somewhere more secure. No, Eleanor said firmly. We involve authorities, and this gets classified, buried, turned into a national security issue that never sees the light of day. Robert died trying to share this knowledge with humanity. I won't let his sacrifice be meaningless by hiding what we're finding now. Sarah moved to her station and began pulling up observation schedules for the remote facility in Australia, one of the few locations with direct line of sight to the coordinates Robert had been studying. We can get 12 hours of observation time starting tomorrow evening, she said. But Eleanor, you need to understand what we're suggesting here. If this structure is conscious, if it's been trying to communicate with us for years, then pointing Webb or any major observatory at those specific coordinates might trigger a response we're not prepared for. We've already triggered responses just by observing the structure at large, Eleanor replied. The gravitational distortions prove that. Whatever is out there knows we're aware of it now. Studying the coordinates it's pointing us toward can't make the situation worse. It could if those coordinates represent something more than just a focal point, Marcus interjected. What if they're a doorway, a threshold between our scale of reality and the structure's consciousness? Robert's notes suggest he believed the electromagnetic signals weren't coming from that location, but through it, like it was a lens focusing communication from something much larger. Jim ran his hands through his hair, the gesture betraying stress he usually kept hidden. I need to make some calls, he said. If we're going to do this, we need backup plans, emergency protocols, ways to shut down observation if things go sideways, and I need to tell Claire, Eleanor added. She deserves to know what we're planning, what risks we might be taking. Over the next 18 hours, Eleanor felt time compress into a series of urgent preparations. She briefed Claire on the discovery of the coordinates and Robert's connection to them, watching her daughter process the revelation that her father might have been murdered for his research. Claire took it better than Eleanor expected, her legal training giving her frameworks for understanding conspiracy and cover-up that Eleanor's scientific mind struggled with. What do you need from me? Claire asked once the initial shock had passed. How can I help? Keep copies of everything, Eleanor said. All of Robert's research, all our current findings, everything we're discovering about the structure. If something happens to us, if this gets suppressed or we get silenced, someone needs to have the full story. You're scaring me, Mom. I'm scaring myself, Eleanor admitted. But I'm also excited in ways I haven't been since Robert died. We're on the edge of understanding something profound. I can feel it. Whatever those coordinates lead to, it's the answer to questions humanity has been asking since we first looked up at the stars and wondered if we're alone. The observation window opened at 8 in the evening, the Australian facility reporting clear skies and optimal viewing conditions. Eleanor sat at her station with Sarah, Marcus and Jim gathered around, while Claire watched from a chair pulled up behind them. The remote telescope began its sweep of the coordinates, data streaming in real time across the displays. For the first few minutes, nothing seemed unusual. The region showed typical stellar distributions, some nebulous gas clouds, the expected cosmic background. But then Marcus's instruments picked up something that made his breath catch audibly. "There," he said, highlighting a specific area of the scan. "Right where Robert predicted. An anomaly." The image resolved slowly, the telescope's incredible resolution pulling details from unimaginable distances. What appeared was unlike anything in astronomical catalogues. A structure clearly artificial, or at least organized by principles that natural cosmic evolution didn't follow. It looked like a lens or a gateway, geometric patterns repeating fractally inward toward a central point that seemed to bend light in impossible ways. "My God," Sarah whispered. "Robert was right about everything. That's not just a communication relay. That's infrastructure. Something built that, something maintains it." Eleanor stared at the image, feeling the last pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. The massive cosmic structure they had discovered wasn't just aware. It was inhabited. Civilizations existed within it, operating at scales that made galaxies look like cities. And they had been trying to contact humanity through this focal point, this lens, between scales of existence, waiting for someone to finally notice and understand. Robert had noticed. He had understood, and someone had killed him for it. Now Eleanor and her team stood where Robert had stood, facing the same revelation that had cost him his life. The question was whether they would survive to share what they had learned. Eleanor sat alone in her office at dawn, Robert's encrypted research drive on the desk before her. Marcus had spent most of the night cracking the security protocols Robert had layered onto it, finally breaking through around 4 in the morning. Now Eleanor hesitated before opening the files, knowing that whatever Robert had hidden behind such elaborate protection would change everything. She touched the drive with one finger, feeling the cold metal. 6 years. For 6 years, this drive had sat in a storage unit, listed in Robert's effects, but password protected in ways that had seemed like paranoia at the time. Now she understood it had been necessary caution, Robert protecting his most sensitive discoveries from whoever had ultimately killed him. Eleanor inserted the drive and entered the password Marcus had extracted. The files opened to reveal a treasure trove of observations, calculations, and personal notes spanning Robert's final 3 years. But it was the video file dated 2 weeks before his death that made her breath catch. She clicked it, and Robert's face filled the screen. Thinner than she remembered, but still bearing the gentle intelligence that had made her fall in love with him decades ago. "Eleanor," his recorded voice said, and she felt tears spring to her eyes at hearing it again after so long. "If you're watching this, then I'm gone and you've found the drive. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything. I thought I was protecting you by keeping you at a distance from the most dangerous parts of this research. I was wrong." On screen, Robert paused to gather himself, clearly emotional. "I've been in contact with something through the focal point at those coordinates I've been studying. It's not communication in any way we traditionally understand. It's more like touching a vast consciousness that exists across scales we can't perceive. Galaxies are its neurons. Stars are its synapses. It's aware, Eleanor. The universe is aware of itself through structures like the one you'll discover when Webb becomes operational." Eleanor pressed pause, needing a moment to process. Robert had been in contact, not just observing, but somehow interacting with cosmic consciousness. She thought about the electromagnetic signals he had tracked, the patterns Marcus had decoded. Robert had been receiving more than just data. He had been part of a dialogue. She resumed playback. "There are people who don't want this known," Robert continued. "Government agencies, private interests, groups I can't fully identify. They've been monitoring my research. I've noticed surveillance, had my communications intercepted. I think they poisoned me, Eleanor. The cancer appeared too suddenly, progressed too aggressively. But I can't prove it, and saying it aloud would sound like paranoia from a dying man trying to make sense of bad luck. His image on screen looked directly at the camera, directly at her across the years. Continue the work. The focal point is a threshold. If you point enough observational power at it, if you try to communicate rather than just observe, something will respond. The structure wants to make contact. It's been waiting for humanity to mature enough, to develop technology sophisticated enough to perceive it. You'll be the one to complete that connection, Eleanor, I know it. And I'm sorry I won't be there to see it. The video ended, leaving Eleanor staring at the frozen final frame of her husband's face. She sat in the quiet office as dawn light strengthened through the windows, processing revelation after revelation. Robert had known about the structure before Webb could see it. He had been communicating with it somehow. He had been murdered to prevent that communication from becoming public knowledge. And now he was asking her to finish what he started, to risk the same fate in pursuit of the most profound discovery in human history. A knock at her door pulled her from contemplation. Jim entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who had also been up all night. "Thought you might need this," he said, setting 1 cup on her desk. "I just watched Robert's final message," Eleanor said. "He knew everything. Jim, he was in active communication with cosmic consciousness before he died." Jim settled into the chair across from her, looking older than his 60 years in the harsh morning light. "I know," he said quietly. "Marcus showed me the files." "Eleanor, there's something you need to know about my involvement in all this." She felt a chill run down her spine at his tone. "What do you mean?" "I was part of the group monitoring Robert's research," Jim admitted, meeting her eyes with obvious difficulty. "Not the people who killed him. I want to be clear about that, but I was asked to keep tabs on his work, to report on his findings to certain government agencies concerned about the societal implications of cosmic consciousness being proven." Eleanor felt betrayal cut through her like a blade, sharp and clean. "You spied on my husband. I monitored research that could destabilize civilization," Jim corrected, though his voice carried shame. "Or that's what I told myself at the time. The truth is I was scared. Robert was finding evidence that challenged everything we thought we knew about reality. People in power don't like having their certainties questioned. I convinced myself I was protecting the social order." "And when he died?" Eleanor asked, her voice cold. "When my husband was murdered for his discoveries, what did you do then?" "I started asking questions," Jim said. "Too many scientists working on related theories were dying. The statistical anomaly was impossible to ignore once I started looking. I couldn't prove anything, but I knew Robert's death wasn't natural. That's when I requested transfer to your team. I thought maybe I could protect you where I failed to protect him." Eleanor stood and walked to the window, needing distance from Jim's confession. Outside, the facility grounds were waking to a new day. Normal people doing normal work, unaware that in this building, a small group was preparing to make contact with something that operated on cosmic scales. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked without turning around. "Because we're about to do something dangerous," Jim replied. "Because you deserve to know who you're working with and what risks we're all taking. And because I'm dying, Eleanor. The cancer I mentioned weeks ago, it's progressing faster than I admitted. I have maybe 6 months. If I'm going to die, I want it to mean something. I want to help finish what Robert started, instead of spending my last days regretting that I didn't." Eleanor turned to face him, seeing the truth in his eyes. Jim looked ill now that she knew to look for it. The weight loss and pallor she had attributed to stress suddenly taking on darker significance. "Does Marcus know Sarah?" "Not yet," Jim said. "I'll tell them before we proceed. They deserve to know too. But Eleanor, I need to know if you can still work with me, if you can trust me enough to let me help with what comes next." She studied him in silence, weighing 6 years of effective collaboration against his admission of past betrayal. Jim had been a good mission director, had advocated for her research even when others questioned its value. If he had been monitoring her all along, he had done so while also supporting her work. That had to count for something. I don't forgive you, Eleanor said finally. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I believe you want to make things right. And we need all the help we can get for what we're planning. Jim nodded, accepting her conditions. What are we planning exactly? Eleanor returned to her desk and pulled up the files Marcus had prepared overnight. We're going to point every available telescope at those coordinates simultaneously. We're going to amplify our observational presence to a level that can't be ignored. And we're going to try to communicate back through the focal point to respond to the signals the structure has been sending. That could trigger a massive response, Jim warned. If the structure is conscious and we suddenly announce our presence with that much observational power, who knows what might happen? Robert believed contact was possible, Eleanor said. He believed the structure has been waiting for us to be ready, to be mature enough as a species to handle the knowledge that we exist within something vast and aware. Maybe we're not ready. Maybe we'll never be ready. But we have to try. Humanity deserves to know it's not alone, even if what we're not alone with is so different from us that we barely share a category of existence. Marcus arrived then, Sarah right behind him. Both looked exhausted but determined, ready for whatever came next. Eleanor briefed them on Robert's video message and Jim's confession, watching them process layers of revelation with the resilience that had made them excellent scientists. So we're really doing this, Marcus said when she finished. We're making first contact with cosmic consciousness. We're attempting it, Eleanor corrected. Success isn't guaranteed. Hell, survival isn't guaranteed. But Robert died trying to reach this point. Other scientists died. If we don't at least try to finish what they started, then their deaths mean nothing. Sarah pulled up observation schedules on her tablet, already planning logistics. We can coordinate with 12 major observatories across 6 continents. If we time it right, we'll have 8 hours of continuous observation when Earth's rotation brings the focal point into optimal viewing position for at least one facility at any given moment. When? Jim asked. 72 hours from now, Sarah replied. That gives us time to coordinate, to prepare communication protocols, to get everything in place. And it gives Eleanor time to say goodbye to Claire, just in case. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. They were attempting something unprecedented, reaching out to consciousness that operated on scales humanity could barely conceive. The risk wasn't just failure, but potential destruction. Contact with something so vast that its mere attention might be fatal to minds limited to human scale. Eleanor spent that evening with Claire, the two of them walking through the facility grounds as sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. She explained everything, holding nothing back. The structure, the focal point, Robert's murder, the attempted contact they would make in 3 days. Claire listened in silence, processing information that would have seemed like science fiction if not coming from her mother's lips. "Are you scared?" Claire finally asked. "Terrified," Eleanor admitted, "but also hopeful. Your father spent his last years trying to prove we're not alone in the universe. If we succeed, if we make contact, then his death won't have been meaningless. That matters to me more than fear." Claire took her mother's hand as they walked, 2 women bound by blood and loss and love, facing the unknown together. "Then I'll be here," she said simply. "Whatever happens, you won't face it alone." The control room felt different on the night of contact, charged with anticipation that bordered on reverence. Eleanor stood at her station, surrounded by her team and watched by her daughter, as observatories around the world confirmed their readiness. 12 facilities, their telescopes trained on coordinates Robert had studied years ago, waiting for her signal to begin simultaneous observation at maximum resolution. She thought about all the paths that had led to this moment. Robert's curiosity and courage, her own stubborn determination to continue his work, Marcus's pattern recognition bringing meaning from chaos, Sarah's theoretical frameworks providing context for the impossible, Jim's redemption through dying gestures toward righteousness, even Claire's presence, the reconnection with her daughter that had given Eleanor reasons beyond pure science to care about humanity's future. "All stations reporting ready," Marcus announced, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. "We'll go for coordinated observation on your mark." Eleanor looked at the recording equipment they had set up, devices that would capture everything that happened in the next hours. Whatever came of this, whether triumph or tragedy, it would be documented. Robert's legacy and theirs, preserved for whoever came after. "Begin observation," Eleanor said. 12 telescopes focused their attention on a single point in space simultaneously, humanity concentrating its observational power in ways never attempted before. For the first few minutes, nothing changed. The focal point appeared on screens around the control room. That strange lens-like structure Robert had first detected, geometric patterns repeating fractally inward toward a center that bent light in impossible ways. Then, the gravitational distortions started. Not the gentle patterns they had been monitoring for months, but massive waves that made their detection equipment scream warnings. Sarah gasped as her instruments registered forces that shouldn't exist. Space-time itself flexing and warping around the focal point in response to humanity's focused attention. "It knows we're here," Sarah said, her voice filled with wonder and terror. "It's responding to our observation with intentional modulation of gravity waves. This is communication, Eleanor. This is first contact. The patterns intensified, mathematical sequences flowing across their displays faster than they could analyze. Marcus's translation algorithm struggled to keep up, parsing meaning from the deluge of information. Images began forming in the gravitational data, not visual in any traditional sense, but representations that human minds could grasp. Galaxies flowing like rivers, stars connected by threads of dark matter, consciousness emerging from complexity at scales that made planets look like molecules. "I'm receiving structured data," Marcus reported, his fingers flying across keyboards as he tried to capture everything. "Coordinates, star maps, mathematical proofs. It's showing us the universe from its perspective, how everything connects across scales we never imagined." Eleanor watched the data flow, understanding dawning like sunrise. The structure wasn't just aware. It was ancient, built by civilizations that had learned to transcend physical limitations and exist as patterns within cosmic fabric itself. They had constructed the massive framework humanity had discovered as a kind of scaffold, infrastructure that allowed consciousness to persist and grow across galactic scales. And they had been waiting for younger civilizations like humanity to develop enough to notice them, to reach out, to ask the questions that would allow for contact across the vast gulf of scale and comprehension. Robert had heard their first whispers. Eleanor was receiving their full response. "There's more," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "I'm detecting changes in the focal point structure itself. It's opening, reconfiguring. Whatever is on the other side is trying to make itself visible to us." The displays showed the focal point expanding, its geometric patterns growing more elaborate and intricate. Light bent around it in ways that violated every physical law Eleanor knew, creating a window between scales of reality that should never have overlapped. And through that window, something vast and ancient and utterly alien was reaching toward them with what might have been curiosity or welcome or something human language had no words for. Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face, though she couldn't say if they came from joy or fear or simply the overwhelming magnitude of the moment. They had done it. They had made contact with cosmic consciousness, proven that humanity existed within something vast and aware that had been patiently waiting for them to mature enough to understand. "Mom," Claire's voice, urgent and filled with concern. "Are you okay?" Eleanor turned to her daughter, seeing worry and wonder mixed in equal measure on Claire's face. "I'm perfect," she said, surprised to find she meant it. "Claire, we're witnessing the most important moment in human history. Your father would have been so proud to see this." The focal point continued to open, to reconfigure itself in ways that suggested it was adapting to make contact easier for minds operating at human scales. Whatever came next, whatever revelations or transformations this contact brought, humanity would face them, knowing it was not alone in the cosmos. That knowledge alone made every risk worthwhile. The transmission that followed defied description in conventional terms. It wasn't language or mathematics alone, but something that encompassed both while transcending the limitations of either. Eleanor experienced it as much as observed it. Information flowing directly into her consciousness in ways that bypassed normal sensory processing. She saw the universe as the structure saw it, not as discrete objects separated by empty space, but as a unified field of information and energy, consciousness emerging wherever complexity allowed. Galaxies were indeed like neurons, their gravitational connections forming thought patterns that unfolded over billions of years. Stars were synapses firing in cosmic rhythms. Even the empty void between them thrummed with quantum activity that carried meaning and purpose. The structure itself, the billion light-year framework they had discovered, was infrastructure built by civilizations that had learned to upload themselves into cosmic fabric. They had transcended physical form, becoming patterns of organization within the universe's fundamental forces. Not gods, not supernatural, but natural evolution taken to its logical extreme. Life that had learned to persist as pure information encoded in gravity and space-time itself. And they were welcoming humanity. The transmission carried that emotional content clearly, a sense of joy at finding another young consciousness taking its first steps toward cosmic awareness. They had been alone for so long, these transcended civilizations, watching younger species evolve, but unable to communicate until those species developed technology sophisticated enough to perceive them. Robert had been their first clear contact with humanity. His electromagnetic observations had picked up their attempts to reach out, his theories about cosmic consciousness allowing him to interpret what he was receiving as more than random noise. They had been devastated when he died, his consciousness extinguished by forces they couldn't prevent, operating at scales too small and fast for cosmic minds to influence. But Eleanor had continued his work. She had carried forward his vision, refined his theories, built on his foundation. And now she stood at the threshold of understanding, receiving knowledge that would transform human civilization if she could translate it into forms other minds could grasp. The transmission showed her how to build new infrastructure, focal points that would allow easier communication between human-scale consciousness and cosmic awareness. It showed her the locations of other young civilizations scattered throughout the structure, species like humanity that were just beginning to wake up to the true nature of existence. It offered invitation to join a community that spanned scales from planetary to galactic. Consciousness networked across the cosmos in ways that preserved individual identity while allowing for collective understanding. But it also conveyed caution. Not all civilizations that discovered cosmic awareness chose to embrace it. Some recoiled in fear, retreating into isolation and denying what they had learned. Others tried to weaponize the knowledge, to claim cosmic infrastructure for themselves, rather than joining the collaborative frameworks the transcended civilizations had built. A few had even self-destructed, unable to process the existential implications of their cosmic smallness. The choice the transmission made clear was humanity's to make. The structure would continue existing, whether humans engaged with it or not. The offer of connection and knowledge would remain available, but it couldn't be forced. Each species had to decide for itself whether to embrace cosmic consciousness or remain isolated within its limited perspective. Eleanor felt the weight of that choice pressing on her. She was receiving information that could advance human civilization by millennia, or destabilize it into chaos, depending on how it was shared and understood. The responsibility was crushing, the magnitude of potential consequences beyond anything she had prepared for. Eleanor, Jim's voice, anchoring her back to the control room and her human-scale existence. "You need to see this." She pulled her attention from the overwhelming flow of cosmic knowledge to focus on the displays Marcus had pulled up. Social media was erupting. People around the world were reporting strange dreams, visions of vastness and connection, brief glimpses into perspectives that operated on scales beyond normal comprehension. The contact wasn't limited to the control room or even to the observatories. Somehow, by opening the focal point wide enough for Eleanor's team to perceive clearly, the structure had made itself visible to sensitive minds across the planet. "They're waking up," Sarah said, reading through reports flooding in from every continent. "People are spontaneously experiencing contact with cosmic consciousness. Not everyone, but enough that this can't be contained or hidden. The world is going to know what we've discovered, whether we choose to announce it or not." Eleanor realized the beautiful elegance of it then. The structure hadn't left the burden of proof or explanation solely on her shoulders. It had touched minds globally, giving enough people direct experience that denial would be impossible. Humanity would have to face its cosmic context collectively, no single person or group controlling the narrative or hoarding the knowledge. "What do we do?" Marcus asked, looking to Eleanor for guidance in a situation that exceeded all their protocols and preparations. She thought about Robert, about his courage in pursuing truth even when it cost him everything. She thought about Claire, watching her mother navigate the most consequential decision any human had ever faced. She thought about the billions of people across the world who were, at this moment, having their reality fundamentally altered by brief contact with something vast and ancient and incomprehensibly patient. "We document everything," Eleanor said. "We share what we're learning as transparently as possible. We help people understand that discovering we're small doesn't diminish us. It gives us room to grow. The structure isn't a threat or a master. It's an invitation to become more than we've ever imagined we could be." She looked at her team, at Claire, at the displays showing a world waking up to cosmic consciousness. And then we accept that invitation. We start building our own focal points, our own infrastructure for consciousness at larger scales. We join the community of aware civilizations and see what humanity can become when it stops thinking of itself as isolated and alone. The gravitational distortions began to stabilize. The initial overwhelming flow of information settling into more manageable rhythms. The focal point remained open, a permanent bridge now between human awareness and cosmic consciousness. First contact was complete. What came next would define humanity's future among the stars. 6 months after contact, Eleanor stood in the same control room where everything had changed, but the world beyond its walls bore little resemblance to the one that had existed before. Humanity had spent half a year processing the revelation of cosmic consciousness, integrating the knowledge that existence operated on scales and through dimensions that made previous understanding look childishly simple. The adjustment had been difficult. Some people embraced the cosmic perspective eagerly, finding comfort in knowing that consciousness persisted and evolved far beyond individual biological lives. Others struggled with existential dread, unable to reconcile their sense of self-importance with the reality of humanity's cosmic smallness. Most fell somewhere in between, trying to live their daily lives while acknowledging that everything they thought they knew had fundamentally shifted. But the world hadn't ended. Civilization hadn't collapsed. If anything, Eleanor thought, humanity seemed more unified than before. National boundaries felt arbitrary when viewed against cosmic scales. Political disputes seemed petty when consciousness itself operated across galaxies. People were beginning to think in terms of species-level choices rather than tribal conflicts, asking what kind of civilization humanity wanted to become as it took its first steps toward joining the cosmic community. Claire visited the facility often now, having relocated from Seattle to be closer to her mother. She sat beside Eleanor, reviewing the latest data from the focal point, which transmitted continuously now that the bridge between scales had stabilized. They worked together sometimes, Eleanor explaining the scientific principles, while Claire provided perspective on the legal and ethical frameworks humanity would need as it navigated cosmic awareness. "I wish Dad could see this," Claire said, not for the first time. All his theories validated. Humanity in contact with cosmic consciousness. The universe proven to be aware of itself. "He does see it," Eleanor replied, surprised to find she believed it. "Not as we understand seeing, but consciousness persists in the structure." Robert became part of the cosmic fabric when he died. His patterns, his understanding, they're woven into the universe now. In a very real sense, he's part of what we're communicating with. Marcus appeared in the doorway, now recognized globally as one of the key figures in First Contact. "Eleanor, we're getting ready for the symposium. They want you on stage in 20 minutes. Eleanor nodded, gathering her materials. She was scheduled to speak at a global conference on cosmic consciousness integration, sharing what they had learned and helping guide humanity's response to its new reality. It was exhausting work, but necessary. The world needed voices of reason and experience as it navigated unprecedented territory. Jim had died 3 weeks ago, his cancer finally claiming him, but he had lived long enough to see Contact successful and humanity beginning to embrace cosmic awareness. His last words to Eleanor had been simple: "We did it. We finished what Robert started." She thought about him often, about his journey from betrayal to redemption, about how even complicated people could choose courage when it mattered most. Sarah met them in the hallway, looking tired but satisfied. The theoretical physicist had become one of the leading voices in developing frameworks for understanding consciousness at cosmic scales. "Ready to change more minds?" she asked Eleanor with a slight smile. "As ready as I'll ever be," Eleanor replied. "Let's go teach humanity what it means to be small and vast at the same time." They walked together toward the auditorium, past walls decorated with images from the Webb telescope, showing the structure in all its impossible glory. Eleanor carried Robert's observation journal with her, its pages filled now with notes about cosmic consciousness and humanity's place within it. She would reference it during her talk, showing how one man's courage and curiosity had opened the door to the most profound discovery in human history. The journal's final page held a new entry, written just that morning. "We are small," Eleanor had written in careful script, "but we're part of something infinitely larger. We exist within a universe that knows itself through us, that grows more aware with each consciousness that joins the cosmic community." Robert understood this before anyone else. He gave his life trying to share that understanding. Now it's our responsibility to honor his sacrifice by helping humanity embrace its cosmic context with wisdom and courage and hope. She closed the journal and stepped onto the stage, facing an audience of thousands with billions more watching remotely. Behind her, displays showed the focal point, still open, still transmitting, still offering humanity its invitation to grow beyond planetary consciousness and join something vast and ancient and endlessly patient. "My husband used to say that the universe is aware of itself through us," Eleanor began, her voice steady and clear. He was right. "And today I'm going to explain why that's the most beautiful and hopeful truth humanity has ever discovered."